London, 1834. The air itself seemed perfumed with expectation, and yet beneath its sweetness lingered decay. Gaslight shimmered upon rain-slicked cobblestones. Carriages rumbled through the crescents of Mayfair, and within the gilded halls of the Ashcombe residence, the final illusion of fortune prepared to crumble. Lady Evelyn Ashcombe, daughter of Viscount Ashcombe, stood before her mirror as her maid fastened the last pearl clasp upon her gown. The reflection that met her gaze was one society had long admired, graceful, composed, with eyes of quiet intelligence. But behind that poise flickered the tremor of a woman aware she was dancing on the edge of ruin. Her family's decline had been whispered about for months, but tonight's ball at Lord and Lady Pennington's townhouse was meant to silence gossip. Her father, desperate to secure her future in his own name, had ensured that one particular gentleman would be present, Edmund Harcourt, the son of an earl and the promise of redemption. Evelyn's task was simple, her father had said. Charm him, secure a proposal, and by morning their fortunes might yet be restored. She had smiled, as dutiful daughters must, though her heart recoiled at the thought of a life purchased through necessity rather than affection. Still, she knew her duty. In England, in that age, sentiment was a luxury few women could afford. The ballroom glittered like a dream carved from gold. Crystal chandeliers threw constellations of light upon the swirling gowns and polished boots, while the orchestra's strings rose in delicate waves above the murmur of conversation. Evelyn entered with measured grace, every movement rehearsed to conceal the faint quickening of her pulse. She curtsied, smiled, exchanged pleasantries with faces that gleamed with insincere warmth. And then she saw him, Mr. Harcourt, across the room, handsome in a manner that felt practiced, his hair artfully disheveled, his expression pleasantly vacant. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. He has prospects, Evelyn. Prospects and pedigree. Their dance was pleasant, in the way all superficial engagements were. He complimented her gown, her composure, the color of her eyes, each remark precise, empty, polished by repetition. Yet Evelyn, out of habit rather than hope, played her part. When the music faded, they paused before a cluster of onlookers, and for a moment it seemed the evening might achieve its intended purpose. Harcourt cleared his throat, glanced nervously toward her father, and began to speak of affection, of admiration, of intentions he had the highest hopes to formalize. The room seemed to hush in anticipation. Evelyn's cheeks warmed, her heart fluttered with the fragile relief of a woman spared from disgrace. Then, like a blade drawn from its sheath, came the words that cleave her world apart. Regrettably, Harcourt stammered, his voice uncertain but resolute. It has come to my attention, certain financial difficulties, matters of inheritance. I must withdraw any previous understanding. His words hung in the air, each syllable a stone thrown into still water. The murmurs began immediately, soft ripples of gossip disguised as sympathy. Evelyn did not move. She felt the blood drain from her face, but her chin remained lifted, her hands perfectly still against her skirts. Across the room, her father's expression faltered, then hardened into a mask of forced indifference. The humiliation was exquisite in its precision. No one laughed outright, but the silence was worse, an elegant cruelty reserved for those who fell from grace. Evelyn excused herself with poise so flawless it bordered on defiance. She walked through the archway, each step deliberate, as though she might yet command her dignity back from the wreckage. In the antechamber beyond the ballroom, she paused, her breath trembling, the glittering noise of the party now a distant echo. She had not wept, not yet. She would not grant society that satisfaction. It was there, in that fragile stillness, that he first saw her. The Duke of Ravensmere stood partly in shadow, tall, severe, a man whose presence seemed carved from winter itself. His dark eyes regarded her with the detached curiosity of one accustomed to surveying battlefields rather than drawing rooms. A scar traced a pale line across his temple, barely visible, yet enough to suggest a history that no polite inquiry would ever touch. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging her quiet courage. "Lady Ashcombe," he said, his voice a low baritone, steady and unadorned. "You bear misfortune with remarkable grace." She turned, startled by the directness of his tone. "Your grace is very kind," she replied softly, "though I suspect it is not grace, but necessity that governs most of us." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps pity, crossed his expression. "Necessity," he repeated. "Yes, it governs more than it should." He looked as though he might say more, but instead bowed curtly and departed, leaving her with the unsettling awareness that she had been truly seen for the first time that evening. By morning, London's gossip sheets were merciless. The Ashcombes were ruined. The viscount's debts, it was said, exceeded decency. Yet while society delighted in their downfall, a private carriage arrived at their modest townhouse bearing the Ravensmere crest. The Duke's letter was brief, a proposal of marriage, couched in impeccable formality, offering not affection but alliance. For Evelyn's father, it was salvation. For Evelyn, it was the quiet surrender of every dream she had once dared to keep. When she met the Duke again 2 days later, the air between them was heavy with unspoken motives. He stood by the window of her father's study, gloved hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed upon the gray drizzle outside. "I offer you stability," he said simply, "and in return, discretion, loyalty, and the preservation of your family's name." Evelyn's voice, though steady, carried the ache of resignation. "An affection, your grace? Is that to play no part?" He turned toward her, and for the briefest instant, the austerity in his eyes softened. "Affection," he said quietly, "is unreliable currency. Let us deal in what endures." The agreement was made that afternoon. No tender vows, no declarations, only signatures and silence. When she withdrew to her chamber that night, Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the fog swallow the rooftops of London. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage wheel struck a puddle, scattering light and sound into the night. She thought of the Duke, of his composure, his mystery, the cold steadiness of his gaze, and wondered whether, beneath that armor, anything still beat. The narrator's voice would later tell us, in that moment, Evelyn believed she had bartered her heart for duty. Yet the bargain, once sealed, would unravel every certainty she possessed. The carriage bearing the new Duchess of Ravensmere wound its way through the Yorkshire moors, its wheels whispering over wet earth and heather. Mist clung to the hills like an old secret, and far ahead, the silhouette of Ravensmere Hall emerged, vast, gray, and formidable against the bruised sky. Lady Evelyn sat within, gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on that distant citadel that was now her home. Marriage had come and gone without ceremony, a quiet exchange at St. George's under an indifferent rain. The Duke had spoken his vows with composure, so measured it felt less like promise and more like decree. She had responded in kind, her voice calm, her heart unlistened to. When they reached the steps of Ravensmere, the servants assembled in solemn ranks. Evelyn descended first, her gown brushing the stone, her breath visible in the chill. The Duke followed, offering his arm in a gesture that was courteous but remote. The butler, a stoic man with iron-gray hair, welcomed them with the subdued reverence of long service. Inside, the hall unfolded like a cathedral of silence. High ceilings vaulted in shadow, portraits glowering from their gilded frames, and a faint scent of beeswax and history. The Duke led her through corridors where time itself seemed to have slowed. "You will find Ravensmere peaceful," he said, his tone polite but perfunctory. "My steward will see to your household arrangements. The east wing is prepared for you. It offers more light than the rest." "Will your grace remain in London long?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Only when Parliament requires me," he replied. "The rest of my time is spent here. Solitude is efficient." That word, efficient, hung between them like frost. She inclined her head and followed him up the staircase, her footsteps soundless on the carpet. Her chambers were elegant but cold, velvet draperies in deep blue, a writing desk of mahogany, a marble fireplace that stood unlit. When the door closed, she exhaled for the first time since entering the house. The stillness pressed around her, vast and unfamiliar. She was a duchess, and yet she had never felt more like an intruder. Days bled quietly into one another. The Duke kept to his routine: correspondence at breakfast, estate business until luncheon, long solitary rides across the moors. Evelyn occupied herself with polite duties, meeting the tenants, inspecting the hothouses, overseeing the accounts that had been neglected since the late Duchess's death. She moved through her new life with grace, but beneath it pulsed an ache for something unnamed. The servants treated her with cautious respect, though their glances carried the unspoken weight of comparison. The shadow of Lady Catriona Ravensmere, beautiful, lost, and endlessly idealized, haunted every corner of the estate. One evening, unable to bear the silence, Evelyn wandered into the music room. A pianoforte stood by the window, its keys yellowed with disuse. She touched them tentatively, coaxing a few hesitant notes into the air. The melody faltered, then steadied, soft and plaintive. It was not joy she played, but memory. When the final chord faded, she heard movement behind her. The Duke stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. "I did not know anyone used this room," he said. "I was told it belonged to your late wife," she replied, her fingers still resting on the keys. His gaze shifted, the line of his jaw tightening. "It did." After a pause, he added, "You play with restraint." Most attempt to fill the silence. Evelyn looked up at him. Perhaps silence deserves respect. Something in her answer unsettled him. For a moment, his composure wavered, then, as always, steadied again. "If you wish," he said, "I will have the instrument tuned." And before she could reply, he was gone. The next morning, she found a note upon the pianoforte, unsigned but unmistakably his. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope containing payment for a music tutor from York. No declaration accompanied the gesture, no apology or explanation. It was practical, almost impersonal, yet the very act betrayed consideration. She touched the paper lightly, her chest tightening with confusion she would not name. Weeks passed, and subtle patterns began to emerge. He dined with her occasionally, always with faultless manners, always leaving before conversation could grow warm. At times she caught him watching her, not with desire, but with a kind of wary curiosity, as though uncertain whether she was flesh or memory. The house itself seemed to observe their uneasy truce, fires burning low, corridors echoing with half-forgotten music, the air heavy with unspoken longing. Letters arrived from London, carrying whispers of scandal. Some claimed the Duke had taken a mistress, others that he regretted his sudden marriage. Evelyn ignored them outwardly, though each word stung like frostbite. She was too proud to confront him, too weary to defend herself. Still, duty compelled her to accompany him to the Queen's summer fête, a necessity, he informed her, for appearances. She agreed with a smile that did not reach her eyes. On the morning of their departure, she found a velvet box placed discreetly upon her dressing table. Inside lay a silver locket, plain and elegant, its face engraved with her new title, E.R. Evelyn, Duchess of Ravensmere. There was no portrait within, only a small folded note, for appearances. The words were impersonal, yet she lingered over them as if searching for tenderness between the lines. When the Duke appeared at her door to escort her, she thanked him with quiet dignity. He inclined his head, but said nothing. The journey to London was silent. At the fête, beneath a canopy of roses and royal banners, they moved as a couple flawlessly rehearsed, each gesture perfectly measured, each smile painted with civility. Yet beneath the hum of conversation, Evelyn heard the whispers gathering like storm clouds. The Duchess of Penrith, a woman with whom the Duke was rumored to share a history, approached with glacial courtesy. "Your Grace," she said sweetly, eyes flicking between them, "how swiftly the seasons turn. I almost mistook your new wife for a debutante." The words, though polished, sliced clean. Evelyn felt the crowd's attention prickling like heat along her skin. The Duke's expression did not change, yet something fierce flared behind his eyes. He stepped closer, the motion deliberate, and in a single, irrevocable instant, he bent and kissed his wife, deeply, publicly, before the watching court and the astonished queen herself. The air fractured with gasps. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart thunderous, her world tilting. When he drew back, his voice was low enough for her alone. Let them find another tale to tell. The fête resumed as if the earth itself dared not move. Yet the damage, or salvation, was done. As the narrator might murmur from the edge of the scene, a single kiss, born of scandal, had set fire to the cold heart of Ravensmere. The days following the Queen's fate unfolded like a dream Evelyn could neither escape nor interpret. The kiss, public, searing, uninvited, had altered everything and nothing at once. London spoke of little else. The scandal, rather than ruin them, had transformed the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere into reluctant icons of passion. Society adored spectacle, and what greater novelty than the sudden tenderness of England's coldest duke? Newspapers printed romantic embellishments. Invitations poured in. Yet beneath the flattery, Evelyn sensed the mockery. She was no longer pitted, but studied, an ornament of rumor, a woman reduced to the meaning others imposed upon her. When they returned to Ravensmere, the household received them with curiosity thinly veiled as congratulations. Evelyn felt every gaze upon her, wondering what the servants whispered once she passed. The Duke, as ever, betrayed nothing. He resumed his work, unruffled by the storm he had summoned. Days slipped by in brittle silence, the kiss unspoken between them, hovering like a ghost in the air. At dinner, their conversation was courteous and clipped, though once, as he passed her the wine, his fingers brushed hers. The contact was brief, accidental perhaps, yet it burned through her composure like fire through frost. One night, after hours of restless turning, Evelyn left her bed and wandered the corridor. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, painting the floor with silver bars. Drawn by instinct, she found herself before the library, a vast chamber of oak and shadow. Within, the Duke sat by the fire, a glass untouched at his elbow, a stack of unopened letters beside him. He did not rise when she entered. "You should be asleep," he said, his tone even. "And you should not be awake," she returned. Her voice, though soft, carried an edge. "You appear troubled, Your Grace." He regarded the flames. "The affairs of Ravensmere are numerous. They do not rest when I do." Evelyn moved closer, her nightrobe whispering against the carpet. "Do you call what you did at the fête an affair of Ravensmere?" His eyes lifted to hers. "I call it necessity. Gossip is a beast best fed once, then left to starve." She studied him, his posture too rigid, his gaze too guarded. "Do you truly believe it starved? You gave him a feast, and you gave me confusion I did not earn." The Duke's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her, as he always did. But something in her voice, or perhaps in his own solitude, broke through the armor. He rose, crossing the room with deliberate slowness until only a breath separated them. "You think me cruel," he said. "I think you unreadable," she replied. "And I am weary of deciphering what you will not speak." His gaze softened, and with it came the shadow of a man she had never met. "I have not spoken because I have nothing to offer that does not wound. I have lived too long among ghosts to know the language of the living." The word struck her like confession and challenged both. "Then tell me of them," she said quietly. "The ghosts." For a long moment, he was silent. Then, as though the silence itself demanded truth, he spoke. He told her of Spain, of smoke and gunfire, of a battlefield that had taken friends and left him with a scar no surgeon could mend. He spoke of his first wife, Catriona, who had died giving birth to a stillborn child, and of the guilt that had settled in his bones like winter. "I failed her," he said, "and the world rewarded that failure with pity. I could bear war, but not sympathy." Evelyn listened, her anger dissolving into ache. She saw, Not the distant nobleman, but the man beneath, the one who had hidden behind duty because grief had stripped him bare. "You did not fail her by living," she said. His eyes met hers, dark and uncertain. "You are too kind to speak so." "Not kind," she murmured, "merely honest." He turned from her then, as though afraid to trust what he saw reflected in her gaze. Yet his next words were almost a whisper. "You asked what that kiss meant. I cannot name it. It was anger, perhaps, or fear. But when I saw them humiliate you, He broke off, struggling for breath not from pain, but from restraint. "I could not endure it." Evelyn's heart clenched. "Then you do feel," she said softly. He gave a faint, mirthless laugh, more than is wise. Outside, thunder rolled over the moors. The first drops of rain spattered the tall windows, a sudden storm sweeping through the night. She stepped closer, the warmth of the fire catching the pale folds of her robe. "Wisdom has never kindled a hearth," she said. "Only courage does that." The Duke looked at her for a long time before reaching into his coat pocket. From it he withdrew the silver locket, the same he had given her before the fête, now different. He opened it and revealed what lay within. A miniature portrait of her, delicately painted, her likeness captured with exquisite care. "I had this commissioned before the fête," he said. "It was never for appearances. I simply lacked the courage to tell you." Her breath caught. For the first time since their marriage, she smiled not from duty, but from the tremor of genuine feeling. "Then you do understand the language of the living, after all." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then clasped it lightly, as though afraid that too much pressure might shatter the fragile peace between them. The firelight gilded his face, softening the severity that had once frightened her. For a moment, there was no duke and duchess, no titles or debts or ghosts. Only two souls caught in the tender uncertainty of beginning again. The rain intensified, a restless rhythm against the windows. Evelyn felt a strange calm settle within her, the kind that follows honesty long deferred. Yet even as warmth bloomed in her chest, a knock echoed through the corridor, a servant's hurried footfall, a letter clutched in trembling hands. The Duke took it, broke the seal, and as his eyes scanned the page, the color drained from his face. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, alarmed. He folded the letter slowly, voice low and taut. "A matter that cannot be ignored. My past, it seems, has not finished with me." The clock struck midnight. The fire sputtered. The storm raged on, and in its shadows, the fragile bond they had begun to weave trembled under the weight of whatever truth the dawn would bring. The morning after the storm dawned pale and brittle, the air at Ravensmere sharp with frost. Evelyn found the Duke in his study, the same letter from the previous night spread upon the desk beside a quill gone dry. He had not slept. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his expression carved from quiet torment. "It is from the late Duchess's family," he said when she entered. "They claim rights to an inheritance left unsettled. If their allegations reach Parliament, my name and yours will be dragged through the mire." His tone was steady, but she heard the fatigue beneath. "They suggest I remarried too quickly. That Ravensmere's fortune was built upon blood and guilt." Evelyn approached the desk, her heart tightening. "And what truth lies within their claim?" "Truth," he murmured bitterly, "is a weapon no less dangerous than a lie. I did not marry for fortune. I married to atone. But men of politics care little for motives. They will seize scandal as they seize land." He turned away, the morning light cold upon his face. "I will travel to London. I shall not have you endure the whispers." Her instinct was to protest, but his restraint stilled her. He spoke like a man already half absent, armored in resolve. "If you leave," she said quietly, "they will say you flee. If you stay, they will see the truth of what we are." He looked at her then, truly looked, at the woman who had once been a transaction and was now something he could not easily name. "And what are we, Evelyn?" She hesitated. "Two souls bound by duty," she said, though her voice trembled with the weight of what she did not say. "But perhaps duty, like winter, gives way in time." He closed his eyes briefly, as if those words alone had undone months of silence. "You give me faith I do not deserve." That afternoon, he departed for London. The hall echoed with the sound of hooves fading into distance, leaving Evelyn alone with the hollow grandeur of Ravensmere. She carried herself through the days with outward calm, writing letters, inspecting the tenants' cottages, pretending the house did not feel like a mausoleum. Yet each evening, when the wind pressed against the windows, she felt the ache of absence, sharp and unfamiliar. She had never expected to miss him, and yet she did. A week passed before news arrived, not from the Duke, but from the city's papers. They reported that the claim had indeed reached the House of Lords. Rumors suggested that Ravensmere's wealth might be seized, its reputation irreparably tarnished. Evelyn felt the eyes of the servants upon her, questioning, fearful. She refused to crumble. That night, she summoned the carriage herself. "To London," she instructed, her voice steady. "I will stand beside my husband." The journey was long, the road slick with ice. By the time she reached Ravensmere House in Grosvenor Square, dusk had fallen. She found the Duke alone in his study, surrounded by correspondence and the brittle remains of composure. He did not look surprised to see her, only deeply, quietly moved. "You should not have come," he said. "Then tell me to go," she answered. He did not. For a long moment they stood in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Then she stepped forward. "You carry this burden as though it were penance," she said softly. "But guilt does not suit you, your grace. It chains you to ghosts while the living wait outside." He exhaled, a sound almost like defeat. "You think me afraid of the world's judgment. But it is not their voices I fear, it is my own." He turned toward her, his eyes dark with conflict. "You came to me as obligation, Evelyn. I made you a duchess because I did not know how to make you free." She reached for his hand, steady despite the tremor in her heart. "You speak as though love is imprisonment. Perhaps it is release." Her words seemed to startle him. For a moment, the iron control that had defined him cracked, and through it she glimpsed something raw, almost boyish. "I do not know how to love without losing," he said. "Then learn," she whispered. "Learn with me." He drew her into his arms, not with the urgency of passion, but with the reverence of surrender. The city beyond their window hummed with rumor and rain, yet within that room there was only stillness, a quiet understanding that needed no declaration. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice roughened by emotion. "I have spent years fearing the past, and yet it was the present that frightened me most. You changed that." The following morning, they appeared together before the Council of Peers. Evelyn's presence beside him silenced the room more effectively than any argument could. She spoke when prompted, her voice calm, her testimony measured. "My husband is guilty," she said, "only of devotion, to this estate, to his people, and, if I may be bold, to the memory of love restored." The words rippled through the chamber, and even the most cynical of lords could not meet her gaze for long. The challenge dissolved in the days that followed. The claims were dismissed for lack of evidence, and the Duke's name, once mired in rumor, emerged untarnished. When they returned to Ravensmere, winter had settled fully over the moors. Yet within the vast halls, warmth had taken root. The staff moved with renewed ease. Laughter, cautious but genuine, returned to the hearths. Evelyn found the Duke in the conservatory one morning, tending to the withered remnants of his late wife's roses. He looked up as she entered, and there was something different in his eyes, light where once there had been shadow. "I thought these beyond saving," he said. "They only needed tending," she replied. He straightened, brushing soil from his gloves. "You have a gift for restoring what I had given up for lost." "Perhaps," she said, smiling faintly, "we share that gift." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the gardens in silence. The Duke reached for her hand, no hesitation this time. Together they stood beneath the glass dome, surrounded by roses slowly stirring back to life. The narrator's voice, if one could hear it, might have spoken softly over the scene. In a world ruled by restraint and reputation, love had been their quiet rebellion. Ravensmere, once a house of ghosts, now breathed again, and within its heart, two souls, long at war with themselves, had finally found peace.